All right, now we are live, so I can repeat the last 3 sentences that I spoke. So basically, I want to review these 2 issues because they're marked for API candidate for the standard, because they either came up in the context of the standard or we just added something from that area into the standard, and it makes sense to do it wholeheartedly. So basically, this one is an example of probably a .NET Framework v1, v1.1 construct where we have a label, and that's used in reflection.emit to annotate effectively an IL instruction with a label. And it had an equals that takes obj, of course, because it comes from object, but it also provided a strongly typed equals, but it never implemented IEquatable. And so when we reviewed the API, somebody suggested, I think it was Merrick, who said maybe we should implement IEquatable. I was just proposing that change. Unless there's any concerns, I would just go with that.
I'm just curious, do we, like, if all the code we see, are these ever compared? Is the equals actually used?
I can tell you in a sec. I would assume at some point. I mean, actually log in, so I see more telemetry.
I could imagine scenarios where maybe you would want to put this in the dictionary. But
so it is used across the board. In the Compat Lab, it's 1.4%, and API port, it's like 0.5% or something. So people call the strongly typed equals. I mean, the other one, I will probably not find any usages because it's a virtual. And then the operators don't seem to have any usage. Just API shape-wise, I agree with Merrick. It's just odd. Like, if you offer a strongly typed equals, you might as well implement IEquatable. Like, there's no, doesn't seem any downside. Only upsides.
Yeah, I think if it already has the strongly typed equals method, and it matches all the behavior that you would expect for the IEquatable practice, just
yeah. So given that I didn't hear any pushback, I'll just mark it as approved. I should have probably left the, yeah, removed the wrong label, of course. Too many API labels. No? Alright. Refresh this here. Alright, so this is a part of the default implementation of interfaces area. So I think his name is Mikal, if I pronounce it correctly. He proposes that we introduce a new exception type that indicates this shared diamond issue when the type loader blows up, because it can't decide which default implementation to use, right? So in this case, you have ibar and ibaz, both extending iFoo, both providing default implementation for prob, and then when you load the class that inherits both of these interfaces, it's unclear which one you want to get, because they're both equally applicable or equally.
Just wanting to make sure that I recall correctly. The compiler, when it can determine at compilation time that this diamond pattern occurs, will error.
That's what Jared said, yes.
So this will only occur for the runtime case where someone compiles and then upgrades one of the DLLs, and the upgraded version of the DLL now contains a default implementation.
Yes, or the platform or whatever else.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
I think having explicit.
Yeah, I think to me, like, I don't know, like, I'm undecided because it doesn't strike me as an exception you would likely handle. Like, I mean, how would you recover from that?
I don't think this is a custom exception type for something that you should potentially explicitly handle, although you might want to do that for reflection cases.
The derived interface could, I mean, it's like an execution exception, and then the derived interface, if it wanted to disambiguate, could implement it, right?
But I also think this is a case where having the explicit exception to provide the additional contextual information is worthwhile.
Why would this be under runtime and not reflection?
because it's only thrown by the runtime. It will also be thrown by the runtime and non-reflections.
But to me, it almost sounds like a typical type load exception, right?
Yeah, this doesn't feel like it
Well,
needs a.
it's not a type load exception though. The types can be loaded and they can be valid. The only problem is if you try and invoke the method in an ambiguous manner, that it will fail.
Oh, sorry. So, like, if we load class,
Yeah, you can load the class and you can call things and you can disambiguate yourself.
I
But
see.
if you happen to cast to the shared interface between both of the implementations and then try and call it, it says, I don't know which default implementation to invoke.
Got it.
Okay, that is much better to recover from what I thought. I thought you cannot actually load class at all. Well, if you only blow up an execution, then it's it's still bad for the program, but at least you can in principle recover, right?
Yeah.
You can higher up you can decide to do something like if it's a plugin or something, right? You could imagine that you just
So like in this
continue from
case
there.
where you're calling frob, you could disambiguate by saying, oh, I definitely want the ibar one or I definitely want the ibat one. So you could retry by doing class to ibar.frob.
Yeah.
I see.
Can you scroll down to show the other exceptions that were considered?
The reflection one, ambiguous match.
Yeah. Okay.
I think ambiguous match is a bad example for that because that's not what you want, right? Ambiguous match is really when you invoke the binder and it cannot decide which of the overloads to pick effectively, right? So it's a very different error case.
Well, it's basically what's happening here under the covers. It's just not necessarily happening via, which is the confusion.
What about something more generic like execution engine exception, or like can we brainstorm some other alternative existing exceptions and rule them out?
It's the execution engine I would rule out because it's one of those that you can't handle, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you
fatal.
can, but you have to opt in, which I don't think they are supporting core. I think in core you cannot handle it at all.
I think if we exposed this type and it only had the message, I'm not sure that it's worthwhile. I think I would also want to see additional info on there rather than just the message, like possibly the two types or the type array that it couldn't disambiguate between.
If we did that, then that meant that this exception wouldn't really be usable for other scenarios. It would be locked very specifically to the diamond problem, effectively. Because otherwise the properties wouldn't be populated or would be nonsensical or
Well,
something.
the message is trying to return
Yeah.
very clearly ties it to that anyway.
Well, but that's just a string, right? Like we can always put other strings in there.
Yeah, what throws invalid program exception? Does anybody know?
I think that's if you try to like load a 64-bit program in a 32-bit process, I think.
There's other cases. I think it's IL validation too.
Okay.
Yeah, I think execution engine exception is when the CLR detects corrupted state, right? Which is definitely fatal. And yeah, embedded program I think I've seen when I had bad IL.
I mean, there are
Invalid program is actually it's useful to limit that one. I recall it being very specific, so we shouldn't reuse that one for sure.
Yeah. And I think the one you talked about was something with image, right? Image.
Oh yeah, image
file,
format
file
exception.
image or whatever. I forgot. Something image.
Bad image format exception.
Yeah, bad image.
Yeah, that one. Okay. Good time.
So we have type initialization exception, type load exception. We said those are both out of it because there's not type loading happening here.
Right.
It's a method call. The type's loaded fine. It's a method call that's failing.
And execution engine is obsoleted anyways.
We could say it's like method not found exception, except it's the opposite.
Methods found.
Too many methods found.
Yeah, the other one that you could butcher into submission is target invocation exception, but I'm not a fan of that either.
I think how you phrase that, butcher it in the submission.
Yeah. I mean,
I think the exception name and the place are probably good.
So system
I-
runtime is a little weird, just because there's so little stuff in that.
Yeah, system runtime. So
System runtime compiler services.
It's not a compiler thing, though. It's a runtime thing.
to
Well,
echo
the
Christoph,
runtime uses things in compiler services.
yeah, I think compiler service is meant for things that the compiler invokes, which users never ever have to deal with.
Well,
It's more
but
like plumbing.
we also put unsafe in there and method impls in there. It's basically things that coordinate between the compiler and the runtime that one or the other needs to discern additional information or
We put
expose it.
unsafe here? Yeah, we did. Holy shit.
And I think we even have an exception type in it.
Yeah, I think compiler service is meant to be like, yeah, as you said, like integration between the compiler and the runtime, which is more for plumbing.
Yeah.
System.Runtime was the namespace that Christoph invented to put the crazy things the runtime folks wanted in there, like there's memory fail point, targeted patching opt-out, right? Basically things you never ever use.
Yeah. It would do a good job of hiding this from people, because no one's going to run into it for the most part.
And it's one of the exceptions that will probably be classified as you should never throw this, the runtime will throw it. Which we already warn about on a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah, in that case, is the name the best one? Should we have the name interface in there somewhere?
I think ambiguous implementation is probably good, because it would, if the compiler ever decided to allow a similar thing for non-interfaces, as crazy as that seems, it could be reused.
Would it make sense to use the word target instead of implementation, because we can't figure out where to dispatch the call to?
I know what you mean by target. Target usually refers to the receiver, like the instance. Basically, what this points to. I don't think you want. But
Member? Ambiguous member exception? No.
that one would put you very close to the reflection one, right? Ambiguous. What is it
Yeah.
called? Ambiguous match.
Ambiguous match.
Yeah. I think implementation probably is a good term because it really describes the mechanical parts here, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm just concerned that the name is too generic and people will run into the type and try to reuse it, right?
Well, we can always request that the compiler do the same thing, or do whatever we are doing for other types, like index out of range exception. If you try and use it, you get a warning saying you shouldn't use this. You should use argument range exception instead.
Really?
Yeah, because index out of range is only meant to be thrown by the runtime.
Whose warning is that?
Let me check.
I mean, a good way to make sure people don't throw these is to remove all public constructors. And say only the runtime's ever supposed to construct and throw these things. I mean, I realize that doesn't follow the pattern for exceptions, but...
Yeah. I mean, and that's actually another good point. Like, we should probably have the default constructors for those guys as well. And follow the general gist.
Looks like it's probably a compiler because we don't have an obsolete.
Are you sure that's not one of the analyzers from the Rosen repo? Because I've never seen this warning. I've never heard of it.
You never do the bad thing?
Maybe I never do the bad thing, but... By the way, Eric, are you at home or are you just too lazy to walk over the 50 meters?
Yeah, the second one.
Oh, I see.
I'm more efficient this way.
I'm just too lazy to walk over.
Yeah, I understand that. I mean, but in your case, you have no excuse really, Stephen, right? It's only like, what, 3,000 miles?
Exactly.
Like,
Give or take.
Yeah, I mean, so the other question that I have is like, what is our stance on serialization constructors on exceptions? Are we doing them or are we not doing them for new exceptions?
For new exceptions?
Yeah.
What was the one that we just added for the switch matching thing?
Yeah, switch. I'm so bad with remembering names.
Are we asking if we're adding serialization constructors to new exceptions? Was that the question?
Yes. Are we doing this or not?
Yes.
And do we mark it serializable or not?
Yes. Just for exceptions.
So basically, same as always. We make it
Okay.
serializable. We implement the serialization constructors, and which also probably means we should then add all the other constructors, right? Or the other two, realistically, right? The one that takes no arguments, and the one that takes the serialization thingies.
Yeah, I think for exceptions, it'd be worthwhile to just follow the pattern. And the reason we do the serialization constructor for exceptions is just that, you're marshalling exceptions. You have no idea what's being thrown, and we don't want to make you, only marshal ones that are serializable. So basically, all of our exceptions are serializable.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what the exception we just added a few weeks ago was because I can't look it up.
No, it's something switch. I'm pretty sure switch expression, exception or something. Switch labels API. Or maybe it's under the title. I think that might be it. But I can tell you it was filed by Neo, if that helps. Yep, match failure exception. That's the
There we
title.
go.
But I think the name we finally approved was something switch, I believe.
Okay.
Yeah, Marion just edited.
Oh,
There's
good.
a PR.
It's probably an analyzer. I'm not getting it
Okay.
for a clean C# console.
So standard exception constructors, market serializable. It should it subclass exception directly? Probably. Why not? It's not an
Yeah,
application
I was
exception.
thinking-
It's not a system exception. Sure.
I mean, the problem with system exception is that the whole system application exception hierarchy is just completely busted anyway. But I mean, if you want, arguably it's a system exception, right? Like in the original spirit, right? Like it's not something that you expect the user to ever throw.
Yeah.
So I can go either way. I don't think system exception adds any value anymore, but yeah.
Should the class be sealed?
Normally exceptions aren't.
Some of them are, especially in the cases where we don't expect them to be inherited from.
Yeah, like not reference exception,
Then runtime wrapped.
which is not sealed. I cannot
Yeah.
believe it.
runtime wrapped exception is. That's another one that's in compiler services.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, but
quite
that's a
frankly,
very-
exceptions we should
yeah.
probably seal. Like, as in, like, why would you ever extend this?
Same reason that argument exception stuff like that is it's not sealed because there are multiple different kinds of it.
Users are meant to grow. It's also a non-breaking change to unseal a class. It is a breaking change to seal.
Right.
So we could, given that this is a runtime exception and only meant to be thrown by the runtime, we could seal it. And if we determine it needs to be extended later, we can seal it at that point.
Exactly. So I think this is one of those kinds where, I mean, you could imagine that, as Turner said, right, if the compiler extends the feature to more scenarios, that maybe there's more of a hierarchy behind that, right? But I mean, I don't know why anybody ever would otherwise inherit from this.
Well, then we come back to what I mentioned a few minutes ago, where if you want strongly typed properties hanging off of this thing, and now the exception is applied to more scenarios, do those properties make sense for those additional scenarios?
I think we should review the additional properties as much as I would like them probably separately and later.
Yep.
With
So-
input from the language team on if they think that it would be and runtime valid.
Which properties are you talking about?
Like, I would think it would be useful to give it the list of types that it couldn't disambiguate from. That way you know that way you can easily determine which types are actually the source of the problem.
Because you're thinking someone's looking at the exception in a debugger and inspecting the properties.
Right, and it's easier to do it that way than just reading the message all the time. Especially since the message here doesn't look like it says like iBar and iBaz are the ones that are conflicting.
Yeah, there might be more work than you think it is, though, right? Because you have to.
Well, it's not just
So,
that. It's the method signature. Like the interface name is probably going to be the fully qualified type name, which means the exception string is going to be in terms of length, right?
Which I think is probably fine, because if you ever encounter this guy, you probably want to know what's
Yeah.
going on. Like my favorite case where that is a mess is math, right? When math catalogs explode, and you
Yeah.
look at the root exception, and then it takes you like 20 minutes to write a little program that
Mhm.
walks the exception hierarchy and like gets to the inner type load exceptions and basically just concatenates a giant string that you
Yeah.
can actually reason about.
Oh yeah, there's nothing inherently wrong with long or detailed exception messages.
Yeah.
It's just we don't want to develop. We want a developer to be able to very quickly reason about something rather than having to turn on word wrap.
But like I said, I also think it's
Yeah.
probably something that we'll want to discuss more with language and runtime team to determine if
Yeah.
they think it's feasible and what they think would be appropriate to propose.
Did that thumbs up just go from 2 to 3 while we were talking?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, great.
What was the other one he said?
Yeah, it was Eric St. John, and then I just made an update again.
Great.
I was convinced, so I committed my vote.
All right, so this is what I have in notes. I probably have at least 3 typos in there, but it should be fine.
Yeah.
The constructor that takes an inner exception, are we going to say this probably never has an inner exception, so you don't need that one?
Well, that's exceptions as a matter of course have that as a constructor.
Right, but it's not listed here and it wasn't listed in the
Yeah,
original.
we should add it.
I figured this was a proxy for add the standard exception constructors.
Okay, let's just add this guy.
Which means that the serialization constructor is private, not public. But yeah.
Yeah, I guess it's.
But we'll just follow the pattern.
Yeah.
Whatever.
The less information I have in here, the fewer things I can mess up.
Yeah.
All right, API approved. Wait. All right, now let me go back to the list. So, what are the things that you guys want to look at?
Tanner, you had some, right?
Yeah, I've got 34902.
I'm pretty sure that's the only field I'm not looking for. 349.
Well, I mean, you could just take the PR and change the last numbers to
Yeah, I could do that too. That is
URL hacking, Tanner.
34902.
Yeah. So the issue here is basically we determined we should move the helper methods to be on the vector types themselves as instance methods. We have since determined that because they're instance methods, we actually have a perf regression, and it causes the JIT to hit inlining limits faster because it forces the C# compiler to emit additional locals and then load the address of that local to support the this parameter. The suggested solution was we should take all of these instance methods and make them extension methods on the existing non-generic vector classes to avoid the problem, but still allow users to write the code as they.
And do we think this is is this the right solution, or is the right solution to fix whatever's causing it?
That the way to fix it is to make this parameter no longer passed by ref, which is making an extension method.
Sorry, let me rephrase.
You mean fixing the JIT?
Fixing the C# compiler, whichever would be more feasible. I mean, if the answer those aren't possible, or if the answer is we would have designed it this way as extension methods anyway, then great. But it feels weird to change the API to work around a current perf issue.
Fixing the C# compiler is not possible. It has to emit it as an address. And then for the JIT, at least the comments that Andy had made indicated that it was extremely non-trivial. They would have to do look ahead during the IL importation phase to determine that the address can actually be folded away, and they may have to special case the methods to support, all of which would be non-trivial to do. And it's also likely not general purpose. It would be specific to the intrinsic.
I see.
Yeah, Tanner and I had a discussion about this, I think, yesterday. Like, it would be nice to do the JIT fix, but it's just way too much work right now.
All right. Feels weird, but if it's the best solution, then okay.
So what would that look like? Do you have like a list of APIs?
Yeah, if you scroll down a little bit, it lists them all.
And they would still be on the same type, it would just mark them as extensions? Is that the idea?
No. So right now they're on vector 128 of T as instance method. They would move to vector 128 as static extension method, which is where we put all the other static constructor methods like create and stuff like that.
Did we have an indexer on vector 128 of T?
We have get element and with element because it's read only.
Right, but we didn't put a read-only indexer, right? We just had the get method.
Right.
Okay.
I believe that's because we said the standard pattern for the stuff was to do it this way.
Okay, so we don't have to worry about that then.
Yeah, and I did explicitly call out that in particular, the ones that are the perf concern are as, to scalar, to vector, unsafe, and get lower. The other ones don't have the perf concern because they're not actual runtime intrinsics, and so users could work around it if needed, but it's probably just best to move them all.
Well, I don't understand why would they be different performance-wise?
So when you have an instance method, the first parameter is hidden, and it is implicitly ref of struct.
Right.
When you have an extension method, it's just a struct passed by value type, unless you explicitly say ref this.
Oh, I see.
So the compiler no longer has to create a local and then load the address of that local, which means that the JIT will no longer hit the inline limit when it hits 512 locals as quickly. Because as is used heavily for converting between like the various T's.
And we're not going to find that there are cases where it actually ends up resulting in a copy of a 256-byte structure or something like that?
No, it shouldn't. These are all read-only structs, and when they're passed by value, they're implicitly non-mutable. And in the case of the JIT, we actually elide the as entirely and just mess with the type system to get it to do the right thing. The problem is that the JIT still can't just elide the local that it was creating.
Because if you recall how IL works, right? Like the MSIL is a stack-based system.
Right.
When you're passing a parameter by value, you just push a value onto the stack and then call the method. Or if the value's already on the stack, you could just dupe it and then call the method, right? If you're passing something by ref, you have to pass the address, but you can't take the address of something that's on the stack. You have to take the address of a local, which is what Tanner was talking about. Now the compiler is emitting tons and tons of locals into the method. And that's what was messing up the JIT.
Yeah, that's unfortunate. I mean, you could imagine the other fixes that we give you a way to specify what you want this to be for your method, right? Rather than creating statics by hand. But yeah.
Yeah, but now we're talking runtime changes, compiler changes,
Yeah.
IL changes.
No, I get it. It's unfortunate. Yeah, this is also, I think, one of those types where I'm not super concerned with like the most usable APIs. So it needs to be good enough.
Well, I think the API services, the usability of it doesn't change unless you're trying to invoke these via reflection.
Yeah.
But I don't think people should be invoking these by reflection. And if they do, we can at least tell them it's centralized with all the other helper methods under the non-generic vector 128.
I mean, extension methods remain second-class members, right? Like it's not in your face quite as badly as a static would be, but it's still somewhat in your face at times, right? Like
if I'm in a debugger and I'm in the immediate window, I can still use extension methods there, right? Just with the normal syntax.
yeah, I forgot what usings you get. I think you might get them from the current file or something like this, which is probably what is good enough for you.
Yeah, and well, in this scenario would work because if you're using vector 128, you've already imported the namespace with all of the exception methods.
Yeah. This is just a case of like we did with span, with some of the cases where we didn't want it to cause the JIT to explode.
Right.
For types, we decided to make them extension methods instead.
All right. So, anything else? What was your chance? Eric, do you want to review anything? Jeremy? Otherwise, they just pick random things.
I've got one more that I think was pretty trivial.
That's good.
Huh?
Which one?
34881.
34881.
Just to be clear, Emo, you're asking about any others of importance before we go through the general list?
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically for this, we currently are exposing some of the comparison intrinsics as compare equal ordered scalar and compare equal unordered scalar. It was raised that this might be confusing as it might imply that the result of the comparison is unordered, whereas the actual functionality is that the comparison itself is unordered. So it was suggested that we reword this to either be unordered compare or compare unordered. Basically just moving the ordered unordered keyword before the equal rather than after.
How does that change that?
Because now you're saying that instead of the equality being ordered or unordered, you're saying the comparison is. You're saying compare unordered rather than equal unordered.
We do have precedent in the framework for like string methods. We have like equals, ordinal, compare, ordinal, stuff like that, where the modifier occurs after the compare verb. In the second bullet you have here, could people mistakenly believe that the scalar itself is ordered or unordered? That doesn't really make sense conceptually. So that might not be a huge concern.
You mean in the existing ordering where it's unordered scalar?
No, so I'm looking at the, you see those two bullet points where you have
Right.
A and A or B and B?
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at where you have compare unordered and compare ordered in that order. Is it possible that people might get confused and think that the equal scalar itself as a noun is the thing that is ordered or unordered? I don't think that makes sense conceptually, so people probably wouldn't have that understanding.
Right, and I think given the context of the ordering of the existing names, where we put scalar at the end to signify it's doing a scalar operation, it's much like async in that regards.
Okay.
I think that clarifies that part.
Because given the other APIs that are in the intrinsics types, almost all of them have the verb at the front, and it would be nice to keep all of the compares together rather than have some of them with compare and some with like unordered compare.
Right, which is why my preference is the second section, if we were to make this change.
Why do we have compare and equal, by the way? Why don't we just have equals?
What do you mean?
Like, why do we say compare equal? Why don't we just say equals? Wow.
Because all of the it all maps to a single instruction, which is compare. It's the COMISS and UCOMISS instructions, which is compare unordered scalars and compare ordered scalars, and there's multiple operations for that instruction. So equality, greater than, less than, etc. And we wanted them all grouped together and to match the native convention of
But this one does only equality, right? It does
Yeah,
not do the other ones,
so
right?
those-
So
this
logically,
one-
you get a bool per element or something, right?
You get a mask of all ones or all zeros per
Right.
element.
So it's basically a Boolean result, logically.
Well, it's a vector 128 result.
Yeah.
And it's not a bool because you can have like all ones, all zeros, all ones, all zeros for a given element, which says that the first two were equal or the first and third were equal, but the second and fourth elements were not equal.
Right, but I'm saying you get per value, you effectively get a Boolean result, right? Like coded
Right,
as a
yeah,
mask, right?
yeah.
Like as opposed to some value that indicates which one was larger, which one was smaller.
Right. Yeah.
So, which is why I said, like in the look in the framework, that we only have compare to indicate, basically the in-base result, where it's like larger, smaller, or equal, and then we have equals, which is basically just the Boolean. That's the only reason why I'm asking. It seems odd that we would say compare equal in this, because it also makes it longer, right? But yeah, and much of the other one reads much better. It's the same problem. It just makes the second one, I don't know, it reads more convoluted now. You say, I would agree with you that unordered and ordered as the first word seems bad. You want the verb to be the first one. But the second one still reads really weird when you say compare unordered equals scalar. So it's like you need to basically slowly walk in your head to see what the fucking thing is going on. But maybe that's the way of these intrinsics in general. Yeah, I can go either way. I can leave it as is. I can also like go with the new ones. I don't feel super strongly. What do other people feel about that?
Just as another question, so it looks like this particular instruction also sets v flags. Would we consider maybe in the future having methods that just say equals ordered scalar or something like that?
So in the scalar case, we do return a bool. It's
Okay.
the non-scalar case that we.
Okay, got it.
And there's a PR out to make the bool comparisons to the optimal thing with set CC and jump CC.
Okay. Trying to, like, I'm reading the documentation, trying to wrap my mind around what this instruction does.
It's one of those instructions where it's a single instruction that has like 32 operations, but luckily they're comparisons, so it's easier to reason about than the string manipulation.
Yeah. Okay.
Interesting. Well, Ben was suggesting you pull the scalar forward, so you have compare scalar. What did I say? Compare scalar unordered equal and compare scalar ordered equal. So effectively, they are all like prefixed by compare scalar.
I think if we were to move it forward, I would want it to be compare ordered scalar and compare unordered scalar, which matches the naming of the actual instruction, and then put the modifier of the comparison operation as something like equals less.
Actually, that makes the most sense to me.
Yeah.
Because now you basically have a prefix, or two prefixes, effectively one for ordered, one for unordered, and then all the combinations at the end. I think that's actually the nicest way to group them.
Yeah.
I think that would also match with the name we have to do for AVX2, where rather than having the individual equal overloads, we do it as an enum value. Because there's too many to do as individual overloads.
Okay. Let me just record this, so it seems like we have found the thing we all kind of like. God, I will type it here.
I'm glad all of this work is getting done, as painful as this process has been, because of how much work there is.
Yeah, and we're basically feature complete, and now it's just people using them and saying, "Oh, we broke perf with these changes, and these names don't make sense." So, as long as we can try and get those fixed before 3, then I think.
Oh yeah. The pain has absolutely been worth it. Like this feature is enormously useful.
Yeah. The remaining issue is on what should we call test Z, test C, and test not Z and not C.
Yeah.
But I've not come up with proposal for what those should be.
You know, if someone's going to file a bug saying we want direct access to eFlags registers from C#.
It seems people always want more access unless they realize that the 3 releases of doing the code is a mess. All right.
And that was all the issues.
So this is so I think at this point, the stream on review next week. The DB reader we reviewed today. Yeah, God, I hate when it happens. Guy over the other side. This is something that we have enough context on. Stephen, do you have context on this?
Yeah, if I'm reading correctly, there are some existing methods on SafeBuffer that for reading and writing, and this just creates span-based versions of them, basically.
How old is SafeBuffer? Is that in Forever API?
No, it's like .NET 2.0 or something along those
Yeah,
lines.
that's like 14 years. It classifies as forever.
Yeah, we brought it in .NET Core 1.0, I believe.
APIs of .NET shows it as full framework 4.0, actually.
Okay, that's recent, actually. I mean, 10 years, but yeah.
Yeah.
What other APIs do we have? Interesting. Yeah, I guess read span and write span will be consistent with read array and write array.
Right.
Yeah, I don't have a fundamental concern with that. I mean, SafeBuffer in general seems like a type that would almost go out of. Well, I guess not really, because it's safe as lifetime, right?
Right, well, this type is supposed to be a safe view over unmanaged memory.
Yeah, it's a disposable thing, so these have to be copies.
How do you get the size in that guy?
The safe buffer?
Yeah.
It has a byte length property.
You can set it?
No, it's all. Once these things are constructed, they're immutable in terms of the properties that they have.
Yeah, but how do you construct it with a size?
You subclass it.
Oh, I see. You're supposed to derive from that. I see.
Yeah, and you call initialize to specify how long it is.
I see. Okay, that makes sense now.
And the reason you have to subclass it is because you need to give it a dispose method.
Yeah, I guess you have to decide how you want to manage the memory, right?
Yeah.
All right. Any concerns then? Otherwise, I just approve it.
I had one question. Are there constraints that we've added since .NET 4.0 that would be reasonable to apply to T? Like, should it be unmanaged or something like that, or we just want it to be struct?
We can't change it to be unmanaged. Oh, I guess we could here because SafeBuffer's not itself constrained.
Isn't the unmanaged constraint, like, didn't we decide against using that for new APIs? Because of how difficult it is to use?
You mean because it's limited to C# 7.3 and above, and it has the modrec constraint, so compilers that in languages that don't understand it can't consume it at all?
It's not just that, but say that I'm currently using SafeBuffer, right? And I have I have a T array inside my own code, and then I call read array or write array. I now would not be able to call read span and write span because even though I have existing code that has constrained T to be a struct, T is not further constrained to be unmanaged, and it's kind of a viral constraint.
Yes, it is a very viral constraint.
Yeah, the only reason I wouldn't add the constraint here is because all the other things seem to be constrained to where T is struct. And it seems a bit weird if you want to move from read array to read span. Why would you have a different constraint?
Well, we probably would have used unmanaged had we developed this type while unmanaged was available.
Sure.
But yeah,
Given the, as you said, given the violence, it seems odd to have different constraints on members in the same type.
yeah.
And then the new unmanaged constructed types constraint will allow you to use these in more
Right.
without the.
Yeah.
I mean, all constraints are somewhat viral, right? If you would write generic methods operating over a safe buffer and you have mismatches in the constraints, you're forced to forward them to your receivers as well. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So everybody seems to be generally in support of it. All right. Let's do this. API approved. One down.
This doesn't look. Is there an API here?
I don't think so. It's more like a check-in item for Terry.
Well, so I saw that Steve near the top left a comment with an API in it, but I don't know if it's. No, that's the
No,
current
that's just what
public
we
API.
have. Yeah, that one, I think I need to flip back to Terry to come back with an actual proposal.
We don't have time for this.
Okay, that's easy. What about this one? We should have time for this one.
Yes. So the reason
So
that
does this,
yeah.
sorry, does this mean we're actually considering using obsolete now?
That would be the, okay, I mean, we have used obsolete in the past, it's just that well, I should say I generally don't believe that obsolete is the best way to deprecate APIs. In this case, though, for individual members, it's not horrible. It's more like for, if you want to deprecate a feature, it's usually harder because you have to find the APIs you want to obsolete, and in many cases that it's just noisy, but not actually the actual usage.
Yeah.
And you can suppress it easily.
Anyway, for context, the reason that I had proposed obsoleting this API is because it doesn't play well with the string deduplication feature that's being worked on.
Yeah, so the usage is fairly high. Now, I think you and I had this discussion on like what the usage means, right? And I think neither of us has a right hypothesis on this. But you know, the NetFX Compat Lab usage is I think about 20%. API port is about 10%, and then the other ones are, I think the highest ones we have was from some Android apps, which was like 60% or something. But that seems more like a template issue or one popular library, because I really have a hard time seeing 60% of app developers calling this API.
Yeah.
I mean, the concern with generally making things obsolete that is used, you know, 5 or 10% is like it's super noisy, right?
Maybe this is one of those cases where rather than obsoleting it, especially given how used it is, we should add it to the CoreFX analyzer APIs we have, and maybe we should do a blog post to help raise the visibility that we have CoreFX API analyzers that say you shouldn't use these APIs, and you should consider doing this pattern when you're implementing this interface.
So the reason this is a little more interesting than that is sometimes when we obsolete methods, it's because something better has come along. The reason I put obsolete on here as a proposal is because if you use this API, you will, not might, will be broken when this feature comes online.
Yeah, I agree with that, but at the same time, the moment this says obsolete, people are going to go in search of a workaround, and then they're just going to say new string, /0 with the count, and then just copy the, fill in that string, and they'll be equally broken.
We had actually proposed making that particular scenario work. But
really?
Yeah.
How would you make that work? You would literally return the same string instance?
No. During deduplication, we would look at null strings and not dedupe them.
But it wouldn't be null the whole time. It would only be null some of the time.
Right.
So I don't see how that would work.
Yeah.
So what does copy do? Does it actually copy?
It literally makes a deep copy of a string and returns a new instance.
Because you also
As opposed to clone, which returns this.
Yeah. I also typed as object. Jesus Christ, what were we thinking back then?
Because it's iClonable.
Oh no, really?
Yeah. iClonable returns object, yeah.
Yeah, but we could have still implemented it explicitly and had an actual clone method that returns string.
Yeah, but that was like .NET 1.0.
Yeah, they had explicit implementations in V1. Types
Did
were
anyone
free.
actually use them in one?
I don't know. Maybe they were broken.
Well,
Maybe there was a bug somewhere.
Maybe it was also at the point where that would have been considered, we determined that
Yeah.
clone was just evil in general, and
Yeah.
you shouldn't do it because you have no clue if
Right.
it's shallow or deep or.
Yeah. So by the way, Steve, like your point is well taken. People might just work around it. Hopefully, the message on the obsolete attribute which says to do what you were trying to do this instead. Hopefully that would work.
What are we saying to do instead?
Here I have used string.toCharArray. Or if you're doing interop, use one of the Marshall types.
Maybe you should do string to star. That way, it's not limited to a global unit or any of the others.
Sure, yeah, we could wordsmith that.
I guess my concern is if someone's using this, I mean, I don't have a sense of how this API is used, but if someone's using it, are they doing it because, I mean, presumably they're then using unsafe code. And
Yes,
if they're using unsafe code,
yeah.
maybe they care about performance, and if they care about performance, they're going to, cry when they see toCharArray.
No, so you're absolutely right. The typical use cases I've seen this used for are, I want to make a duplicate of a string and then use unsafe code to change a handful of characters inside of it.
Shouldn't the recommendation then be to use string builder?
Can we put the email address in the obsolete message?
My email address?
Yeah, so they can
I'm
talk
not the
to
one
you.
working on the dedupe feature.
I think that should be the bar for obsolete in general. Like, if you're willing to put the email address in the message, you feel that strongly, then we can talk about it.
I could put an FW link in here.
Ah,
We
that's
like
not good
FW
enough.
links, right?
That's not good enough.
I like that. That's pretty good.
Which one, the FW link or the email address?
No, Levi and Microsoft.
Yeah.
I'll have an autoresponder which just has the FW link.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think this is something that we should consider for, like, in general. Like, we should have, we have a broader discussion on, like, are there any other APIs you want to obsolete in 3.0 where that makes sense? Like, making a one-off decision, I think Stephen has a point that we have not obsoleted things in a long time, and I think I've talked extensively about how broken obsolescence in general is, but I also don't have a great answer for this. I mean, the only counter argument I would have for your case would be, if the workaround is more convoluted, it might be harder to find when you have bugs as a result, right? If it's literally just, there's this one method that probably indicates a bug that you probably use when you do this crazy workaround, then at least you can find those things.
Yeah.
So, like, that might actually be better to leave the API in. Another thing we could do is, like, hide the API, right? I really don't know why clone or copy should really be used by anybody realistically.
It's not that, because I want to cause noise in code when people recompile.
Right.
Like, I don't just want to mark it editor browsable never. Like, I want developers, when they recompile, to have a warning light flashing in their face saying, you're calling this method, this will have undefined behavior going forward.
But you still would also not get new code using it, right?
No, but people who are migrating their code, or people who just have existing code and then they have, like, a nightly CI build where they say, hey, my library is now compiled against 3.0 instead of 2.2, or whatever.
Would this presumably also become part of standard?
The obsolete attribute? Yes.
I specifically meant for 2.1. That's standard 2.
I mean, that's Emo could drive that, but
Or whatever we're calling out.
I mean, if we were to make the change, I would put it this way, I think we should consider it.
Okay, so well, it sounds like we're going to mark this as needs review then.
Yeah, I think I would like to have a few more people on
Sure.
their thoughts on this, but I think in general, like, are you opposed to hiding it, or are you just saying hiding itself is not good enough?
Hiding it itself is not good enough.
Okay, but you also wouldn't be opposed if you would also hide the APIs. Yeah, that's what I thought.
We should be doing that in general anyway with
Yeah.
APIs that are nonsensical.
We can't hear whoever's talking right now.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you're very, very quiet. Okay. All right, then I think we go to the second topic.
Okay.
Which I hopefully can find the PR for. Here we go. Yeah, issue. So, no reason to leave. You can still provide your opinion.
Oh, I have stuff to do. Sorry.
What they all say.
Remember, we decided my opinions were strongly held but incorrect.
I see. Let me actually join the other call. Sorry, guys, I'll drop you off to make sure that everybody else join the other call, that we have everybody on the same call. Great thing with Teams Meet. Yeah, would you mind joining it?
But you want to first maybe we do this so that you know the team is going to ask a question. Yeah, probably. I have no doubt.
Join.
Like the same technology as like the third one. I think so, yeah.
Can I? Is there a reason? Have we figured out how to reboot these guys?
Unplug it and plug it back in.
The power.
Where's the plug?
Keep the power
Probably.
button. Keep the power button.
Where's the power? Oh, this guy here? Oh yeah, here we go. The fuck is this? Slide down PC to? Is this an action running in
It's a
PC?
surface,
Oh my god!
but it's not the original surface.
What do you mean? There are no 9 services.
It's not an ARM surface. It would be nice if we had figured out some application.
Yes. Alright, sorry guys, we're waiting for the conference room to reboot. This is actually starting? Oh yeah, now it's starting. Yay! Let me join. Yeah, rebooting the conference room is not a line you often use. Couldn't sign into Microsoft Teams.
Wonderful.
Hopefully it's temporary.
Would you like to try again?
I don't know. How do you try again here? There's no OK button. Or retry. Oh boy. Oh, here we go. Nope, same issue. Well, can you guys hear me? Yeah, so I cannot join the conference room, so I joined my laptop now. So probably everyone in the room has to speak up a little bit, otherwise it's not gonna work. But hey, we are flexible. All right. We have people from the F team here. So Diego is here, and your name is again?
Shy.
You just joined, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So do you want to walk us through this?
Yeah. So this is a relatively non-major issue in the API for ADO.NET. The idea is to make, in general, ADO.NET a bit more usable. Maybe we'll talk about it more later. So this attacks a very specific point, which is that we have many accessors on DbDataReader, which is the main way for accessing database result sets. DbDataReader already has a lot of APIs, but the problem is that all field access is currently ordinal. It's only by index. So when you're getting your results back, you need to know how your columns and the results are ordered, and you need to specify an index. And there is a utility method called getOrdinal, which gets you the index given a column name. So you can chain those two things together. You can say, give me the integer for the field whose name is this, but simply verbose. So the idea here is to simply add overloads that directly receive the column name and provide the result, the column. There's been some discussion whether this should go inside or extension methods if we scroll down, but I'm not sure that's relevant anymore.
Why?
So there was some discussion around not putting this inside .NET Standard, but rather having this as an extension with a NuGet, because the proposal is for these to be non-virtual, specifically non-virtual, because there shouldn't be a reason for any provider to actually override them. They should have the exact same behavior as if you don't want to allow any sort of behavior variation there. So they should literally internally, each one of these should just do get ordinal to get the number for the name, and then call the overload of the same method that accepts an order. You want to lock that down.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine how a virtual implementation could do better than that performance-wise, right?
Yeah, there was a question of doing any sort of caching, so caching from the transition from the name to the ordinal, but that's already supposed to happen inside get ordinal, which we would be wrapping here. So the performance happens at a lower level anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's basically it. There's another issue, like a somewhat orthogonal one, about allowing overloads or other versions that return value task. The issue is that at least so we have two async methods here. Basically, the idea of the scope of this one is to provide matching methods for the methods that already exist so it's only to solve the problem of int to string. Then if we want to also solve the problem of value task, then we kind of consider it, and I think it's an orthogonal question.
So would you recommend to use value task even if the existing overload that takes the ordinal returns task? I would say the only reason we haven't considered value task for this is that we have another issue that we haven't figured out yet how we are going to solve it. That is about adding value task of T versions of this API. And the main problem is that all the reasonable names for APIs are already taken, and they return task of T. Either we need to come up with a new naming pattern for these methods to return value task of T. And if we did that, then I would agree. Let's only add the methods that return value task of T and not add any more methods that return task of T. But the problem is that we haven't solved that, and we intentionally reduce the scope of this issue to just the things that we already know how we'll do.
Right.
But
Yeah, I guess that all makes sense. My question would just be, let's say we don't figure out a way. I'm sure we can, but let's say we don't figure out a way to do that, and so we don't have any of those existing methods overloaded to return value task of T. That means that we wouldn't have them for these two new ones being added either. And are we more concerned with the performance, or are we more concerned with the consistency?
so the performance even is not automatic that you are going to get the best possible performance if we have the value task of T version of this, because as Shai said, this version of the method is supposed to just delegate to the existing one. I mean, this is not a virtual method. All providers are going to get it, and the implementation is fixed, and it's just going to get the ordinals.
You're saying that these are necessarily going to only target existing public virtual surface area?
Yes, if we add it, and then they need to delegate to the method that already returns the task of T.
Yeah, I agree. If these are only going to, these are just wrappers around existing public virtual surface area, then there's relatively no benefit to returning value task.
But there is a chance that we decide to not add the async ones, and we say, well, we wait until we have the other story solved.
I mean, you could make them virtual, right? I mean, you could say they get feed the value async and is DB null async. You make them virtual, make the default implementation go through the old path, and then say, if you really want to optimize this path, the provider can override it and then benefit from that.
So it's just interesting, but if you really care about performance, you should not be using these methods anyway. You should be using, let's say, for instance, you have an ORM and you are building the materializer of objects for that ORM. What you do is basically you create a hard-coded map of the ordinals that you know, and then you invoke the ordinal version of these APIs. Otherwise, you are always going to go through that indirection from the name to the ordinal,
right?
And you are paying the price for every single field of every single row that you materialize. So this is not an API that we are adding for performance. We are adding it for usability only. So I would prefer to just wait until we solve the other problem before we add the async ones, or we just add this and we say, well, this is just sugar over existing API, and doesn't matter. When we solve the other problem, it's going to have a different naming pattern anyway. Or
I'll just add that with the other problem, so the new methods, there's other problems that we want to fix, like the problem of handling null values coming back. So there's other problems we want to solve in any case, and that's why we haven't yet made any sort of proposal. And then there's, of course, the argument, unrelated, there's the argument of consistency of having these, having everything here be the exact mirror of the version that's getting an ordinal, except for get field value async, which would be a different one. It would be virtual. All of a sudden, it would be different in its signature. So it's also an API consistency question.
Yeah, the other thing. So Shai already said this, but this class already has too many methods. Adding an overload of an existing method with little variation, I think it's okay. It doesn't add noise. But if we start like complicating things, we're trying to walk a line basically between adding value and managing noise.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it is beneficial to think about how we could use value task on the reader in general, and then figure out what that would look like in terms of API patterns, right? Because we have this problem almost everywhere else in the framework. We have this with Stream, right? Every single time you have an extension point, and you have derivatives, and you introduce a new core concept like how do you float this through the system and not break people, right? That's generally hard.
If you have any suggestions, by the way, for the naming pattern for methods as return value task when there is an existing task already, that would be great. If you ever encountered that before and you can.
I don't think we have this already. Like, Stephen, do we already have a case that we did this in the framework anywhere?
No, well, yes, but we haven't had to deal with the naming issue because we also changed arguments. So they're true overloads that return value task. So for example, like stream.readAsync, in addition to having a new overload that returned value task, that overload also took a memory or read-only memory instead of a byte array. So we didn't have to figure out a naming convention because we didn't need a new name.
I see.
So that would be equivalent to returning value task from this.
Yeah, the positive thing is that, as I said, that there's going to be another feature anyway, maybe of the new. So the new method wouldn't only be about returning value task; it would also be about other things like handling maybe nullability in a better way. That's another problem that we're trying to fix. So maybe we would use that as a way to solve our naming problem.
Yeah, and we want to take, the approach of using reusable value tasks. If we are going to return value tasks for this method, they should be reusable because otherwise it doesn't make it more efficient.
That would be an internal concern.
I mean, by reusable, value task is already like a struct, right? So you don't have to allocate.
He means in .NET Core 2.1, we added the ability to back a value task by an interface rather than just a T or a task of T, which allows you to provide your own interface-based implementation that can be reused for multiple asynchronously completing operations.
Which is what async enumerable does. But I think that also another thing that we're after, and now we are talking about the whole set of problems that we have in this API. If we are going to return a reusable value task, we should probably consider an API that kind of conveys that if you call to one of those, it's going to change under your feet. Basically. Next time you read another row, you can still use that value task to get the values that you are going to get the value for this row.
Right. Maybe, but there are plenty of places where we basically said, sort of written in stone, that value task has this property in general, and there's only a few things that you should do with it. And so, like certain stream.readAsync methods return reusable value tasks, and if you were to do anything on that stream again, you would invalidate it. So I wouldn't be too concerned about having to surface that in the API. We're basically saying that one of the ways that value task differs from task is that there are only certain operations you can do on it. You can directly await it, or directly you check if it's already completed and access its value. But any sort of caching, reusing after other operations, and so on, those are all invalid uses.
So in this case, it wouldn't be necessarily that it's invalid. That it's valid. It's only that you need to know that you are now
on another row.
Correct?
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
So for instance, in async enumerable, the value task of bool that you return, you can await it. It's the same value task that you can await multiple times, right?
Correct.
Okay, so in this case, it would be the same. It would be that we don't want to invalidate the value task. We just need to.
Oh, sorry. So let me rephrase. If you tried to, you will get back a value task of T. If you then call move next async and try to await the original value task you get back, you'll get an exception.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's what I want. So I want it to be more like the value task of bool on async enumerable.
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, that one throws. So
you'll get exception if you try and await that value task after you've. So if that represents an actually asynchronously completed operation, and then you do move next again and it causes something else to run async, you try and await that original value task, it's going to throw an exception. It's going to say this is an invalid operation. Because the value task itself stores a token in it that indicates kind of what version it is, and that has to match with the thing that provided the token. And every time you call move next, that version gets incremented.
I see. Okay, so I guess I had misunderstood how it worked. Okay.
It's still the same object over and over and over, but we try and because there are cases where if you were using that value task and you were trying to, from a consumer's perspective, it's not reusable. It's one shot. And that's always the case. And we want that to always be assumed. And so we do our best within the limits of what we can performance-wise to say, these are the only ways that you can use this thing. Anything else is invalid, and we'll try and throw for as many of those as we possibly can.
Okay, I need to go back to understand exactly how it works. I thought that the whole point was you create this object once, well, it's actually struct, right? So
So there's two things here. There's the value task of T, and there's the I value task source of T. The I value task source of T is reusable. You can create as many different things as you want from it, one at a time. The value task of T, the struct, is not reusable. It's just a wrapper for that I value task source of T and effectively an integer.
and it's a fuse, basically. Burns and you cannot use it anymore.
Yep.
Okay.
And maybe one comment that doesn't necessarily have any impact over this, but just as a reminder, in many cases, the user is supposed to know that there's no value in using the async overloads because there's not going to be any I/O. So just as a reminder, the way this API works is when you execute a query, you're going to tell it whether you want sequential access or not, which basically means is the row buffered in memory or not. There's an API for that in ADO.NET. So if you don't specify this sequential access, basically you're telling ADO.NET that you want the row to be buffered. You want to be able to read columns in any order, which means basically that the entire row is in memory and no column access is ever going to perform I/O. Just a reminder how this API works.
So get field value async. So I was under the impression that when you call move next, you don't have the row yet, you might have to still fetch, and you're saying that's only the case when you said I want sequential access for the row. Otherwise, right, the entire row will be fetched as a memory, and then you have random access effectively.
The contract is that you can, if you can do random access when accessing fields, that basically means that you're forcing the whole row to be buffered. Or maybe it means that every column access actually goes to the server, but I've never seen a database driver do that because it's very inefficient. I mean, in theory, anything is possible with it.
I see.
So I'm just saying that the async overloads, the guideline is usually to use them only if you're using the sequential access mode, which is maybe a little bit more rare, but it's still there.
So the bulk of the work here, when you would do async, would be just the move next async, where we just wait for the next row to be fetched, and then afterwards it's random access. So the other option that I see is like you could imagine that instead of having get field value async and isDB null async, you just have one worker method that does both of them and that returns value task.
So that would be
combine the two, like basically try get value async and returns false if it's null, otherwise it returns.
That would be the new API method that we're trying to think about, which solves the value task, solves the nullability, and so on. These are the two big problems that we'd like to solve. And it could be like just a new get method, maybe it's called get. And maybe it interacts with nullability in some way, but we haven't designed it.
I mean, like I think the general gist is like in order to use value task and not have weird mismatches between the current virtual method and this one, you probably want to introduce a new virtual method that you will expect providers to override to add to that you can actually get true asynchronicity and not just a wrapper around the task of T. In which case you need a new worker method anyway, and then. At that point, you might be actually, better off to just combine these two things. It also seems weird to say, first you do an async operation to determine whether it's null, and if it's not null, you call another one that is async. It seems like weird, right? You would probably want to fetch them both at the same time. Because it's just basically another bool that you need to transport somehow.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question. So all of these method names were chosen because they match the name of the existing abstract overloads that take the ordinal?
That's correct. They're not actually abstract mode, but anyway,
Okay. The reason I was asking is like get float should have been called get single if it was following the framework guidelines stuff.
This is super old stuff. Super old stuff.
I think that the data reader was created.
For the ones where you're just forwarding cancellation token, I think we've been preferring to just use optional parameters lately. Is that fine?
Totally.
Then we can just do cancellation token equals.
The only possible argument against it, which is not a real argument, is that in other areas of ADO.NET you already have this pattern. So it would be a little bit inconsistent, but I don't think anybody cares.
We cannot do default without it.
Yeah, we can't delete the old ones.
Yeah.
But for the new cases, we can avoid duplication. Languages can have the same effective behavior by just not.
Yeah, so I think like given what we just said, I would be leaning towards approving the API as is, except for the async ones. I would say for the async ones, think about what you want to do with them, whether you want to have them at all, or whether you want to do a different pattern where you somehow figure out how you would do, how would you unify the current ones that return task of T with value task, and then come back with that proposal isolation. Because the other ones seem all very straightforward, right? They're all one-to-one wrappers.
Yeah, and incidentally, that is the non-async ones are the most common.
The only one that's odd here is the get provider specific values of an object array. What does that mean?
So an ADO.NET provider has the option of having its own type, like it's called a provider specific type. For example, in Postgres, you have a datetime value that's not in the same precision and range as .NET datetime. So by default, it's going to return datetime, but you can ask it for a provider specific type, which would be some other type, like a Postgres specific CLR type that represents it. And this is an overload specific, so the specific values returns it as an array of values. Again, this is an old API. You have the option of interacting like this with ADO.NET. I don't think we'd add today if we.
But the one that returns that takes an object array, is that new or?
It's again.
Yeah, this one is.
Oh, that must be
this one is
could be a
existing.
mistake.
Yeah, this one already exists.
Yeah, that's a mistake. Right.
Okay, that makes
We should
sense.
remove it.
All right, then.
There's no ordinal parameter anyway for string.
You have to get provider specific value, which takes an int32, and that's the one that you want to have the overload for. Yeah,
It's
that
like
makes
10.
sense. Yep. Yep. Any concerns? Anybody on the call? Huh? Makes it easy.
So you would prefer to leave out the async methods, at least for now?
Yeah, I would just decouple them because it's easier for us if you can just approve all the rest, and then it's just you just think about what you want to do with value task and these async operations. Because I think I agree with Diego. Like in general, like you want to have a story that is holistic and not just solving it for the case where you pass in a string that's period, right? You also want to have a story that when you're passing an int, you still get decent performance, right? And especially because when you do an OR mapper, it seems like you want to go through the int-based ones anyways, in which case you really want a story there.
Yeah. And in these methods, we are already using the word value that cannot be pivot. Like that.
Ah, true. Maybe get value.
Yeah, get value task. Async. That's weird.
Yeah.
I think we need a new class.
And Diego is more.
Yeah, to be fair though, like I don't think this class is substantially harder than Stream from a hierarchy standpoint. Like you have the same problem that Stream has, right? Where you have different models over virtuals, and you have to think about what that means for the hierarchy. And to be clear, it's not pretty, but like introducing a new stream type was considered worse than whatever we can do to the type. So I think this might be in a similar camp where it might be worthwhile at least thinking about how you would do this without introducing a new type.
Stream is the base class for many types, right? This one is only for providers.
Sure.
And we can have an implementation that basically delegates to existing readers of the new class.
Yeah, there's a
So
backwards
that's
compatible way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just how many people extend it, it's also how many people use the type. Because everybody who uses the type and accepts it, like, has to change, right? That's
But I mean, you could leave the existing type and not enrich it, not enhance it in any way, and just tell people if you want like the latest and greatest API, then you just switch to this new one instead.
That is generally true, but in practice that often means you need an adapter in between, in which case you have to solve the same problem.
That's yeah.
In which case you're like back to square one of like how do I make the old DbDataReader talk to the new one where they have a mismatch in the way the stuff is combined. So
yeah.
Which is why that's what I'm saying. Like if you really want to have it fly to the ecosystem, what constrains you is the number of people using the type. And if you end up having to write an adapter, I don't see this as substantially easier to solve than evolving this type. I mean, it might be or might be not, but I don't think there's a substantial difference.
The one advantage is that at the end of the process, you end up with a type that's a clean API, like the one that's the newer one.
Maybe you may end up in a world where you have two types forever.
Yeah.
Like I mean, I honestly like this is one of those areas where ASP.NET was quite successful with like cutting the ties to the past, but for anything that is more in between the BCL and between an app model, like I don't know where the line is, but there's a line somewhere, and like as soon as you end up in this, well, you have to carry around both forever. Like, I'm not sure that's a better model. Yeah. Like now you have just more complexity to deal with.
Yeah. Yes. Yes, one of the other.
Yeah. Can you remind me what that was?
I mean, we have, so this is like, this is one small issue, but there's actually a plan to work on several others on ADO.NET. So on CoreFX repo, there's a handful of issues there. Some of them are actually quite important performance-wise, and we're prioritizing those, unlike this issue. And the question was mainly what the kind of, I don't know, how fast should we be? What would be the deadline for getting in any sort of change?
Because we want those to be as standard one.
Exactly.
That one would be really faster. How many are we talking about?
There's 3 main issues.
Are they already there?
They're already there, yes.
Okay, we have 25 minutes left. Even though the room has left, I'm not sure many people are still on the call. Steven, are you still with me?
I'm still here.
Oh, great. So we have at least some people. Which leaves us.
Steve Harder's on the line, Brendan Conroy, and Eric St. John are all there.
Oh, perfect. All right, so let me then just copy and paste what we just said so we can at least make some progress.
Yep.
Good call. We said we leave these guys off. This one's a mistake, which leaves us with just this type. Good?
Yep.
Perfect.
Makes sense.
All right. Okay, let's approve this guy, API. So let's mark this for standard as well, I suppose, because you probably want to get these changes into standard as well.
Absolutely.
I guess. It's done. All right. Give me some keywords of what will be in the API.
Just look for system data.
I have the numbers for you if you want them.
Okay.
Oh yeah, even better. What's the number?
So one is 3688, the old. Another one is 8955.
Oh. For some reason I don't mark. I have to enter them here. So you said 3.
Maybe start with 8955. It's a bit easier to. 8955. Without the 3.
Without the 3.
Oh, that old.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, they're all very old. This is one thing we'd like to solve. Currently, when you want to write anything to the database, you use something called a DB parameter, and it's a non-generic class. It's never been made. There's never been a generic story here. So any int that you want to write to a database is going to have to be boxed. We don't like that very much.
So it's hard to review this when you don't actually have. Do you have a proposal somewhere down?
Not yet. This is not in this.
Yeah.
So there's a discussion about design below, like right there. But how do we do it? Do we go via base class interface? There's some discussion here, but it's not mature, not ready for review. This is an example of the kind of thing we'd like to get into 2.1 if possible.
Yeah, if you can get a design literally written up by end of week,
End of week.
and then we could review it next week, we have a really high chance. Otherwise, it will get harder. Like, I mean, depending on how much churn there is, we might be able to approve this later, but I don't know what the lockdown will be for the standard. Because the problem is we have to coordinate this change across various parties, right? And like the problem on our end is we have to, like, in general, we try to avoid like adding net new code and getting it into the standard at the same time, because it's hard, because you have to basically get 3-4 parties to all agree that this implementation that you want. You don't have confidence that the implementation will work before you actually implemented it, right? So ideally you have an implementation, and at least in .NET Core, you're happy with the implementation, and then it's just a matter of getting it into the standard, which is kind of what we did with IAsing and NewMove, right? We first wrote the code in CoreFX, we kind of convinced us that's the shape we want, and then you just diff it against the standard, and then you add the APIs, which is generally what you want. And I think that in order to do that, I think you would have to be able to do this in the next 4 or 5 weeks, probably.
4 or 5 weeks?
Because, I mean, like, I don't know what the preview timelines are, but, like, it gets close to your suffering lockdown.
Okay.
So faster is better. But, I mean, I would generally say, like, also if you miss the boat for 2.1, nothing bad happens. I mean, like, you're missing full framework anyway at this point, because they're no longer implementing that standard. And so everybody else, like Core, Xamarin, they move reasonably fast. So I would expect if we get enough APIs together for 2.2, then there will be a 2.2 at some point too, right? So you're not locked out from that. It just means you catch a later bus, effectively.
Okay. This is one. If you're interested in seeing
what's the other
another.
one?
3688, even older. So
I've hired you earlier.
yeah, it's been there for a while. This is about providing an actual batching API, so a way to execute one command that has multiple statements. Right now, the way for doing that is to simply pack them in with semicolons. The problem with that is that at the protocol level, in many databases, including even SQL Server, that's not a good idea. That doesn't work that way, because you have to send separate protocol messages, which forces the driver to parse the SQL to find that semicolon, to split on it, and send 2 different things. This is one of 2 issues designed to stop parsing SQL at the client side. This is like the ultimate goal here. I don't think that an SQL, like an ADO.NET driver, is supposed to be parsing SQL and rewriting it, but that's currently necessary because of this and another issue. Plus, even I know that this in SQL Server does work, but it's quite inefficient. So if
it pollutes the cache.
A non-ideal way to do batching.
Makes sense. So the proposal would be that you change the object model so you can effectively submit, you give like a batch class that you can add commands to, and then you just set execute batch or something like that.
Maybe SQL command set. There's something already that exists like that internally in SQL client, so maybe adopt this idea somehow.
So it's interesting, if you have a data table or a data set, you are able to do that with SQL Server, at least, and probably other providers as well, because there is a way, an internal API that does batching, that there is no public service besides.
Yeah. That seems a bit, I mean, yeah, you would have to move fast.
Yeah,
you want to get them in.
It needs a lot of API design.
But, I mean, I think getting this into 3.0 is probably much more reasonable than getting it into standard. But we can try. I mean, if once you have an implementation, we can see where we are. But I would not rush the implementation to catch the standard. Like, I would say, yeah, don't slow down artificially, but I would say, shoot for 3.0, get it into the shape for 3.0, and then once we know what the APIs is, it's pretty straightforward for us to just add it to this.
Maybe 2.2.
And then if that doesn't work anymore, then it's 2.2. But I mean, we are converging code very aggressively with Xamarin. I'm not sure how easy it is for them to pick up ADO.NET stuff, but I would think, given that how that code works, it's probably one of the easier ones for them to pick up. compared to, let's say, methods on string.
Mm.
So I think we can probably make that happen.
Okay.
But yeah, don't take too much time.
All right.
Cool. Anything else that you like? If it's a particular API that we need to look at, or
There's nothing.
No. The other thing that we are considering adding is for async. There are something that don't have an async version because SQL line never needed.
Prepare.
Those async.
That's right.
so what are your plans for both iasync disposable and iasync? How would you use them in EF or /ADO.NET? Are there any plans for that?
So in at the ADO.NET layer, we are having a discussion on whether it may have something that uses iasync, or whether we can have something like a version of read async that instead of running a task of bool returns the value task of bool, something like that. At the EF core level, we are definitely iasync.
You basically give me iasync enumerable of customer, let's say, and then I can fetch them.
Yeah, the way it works in EF is basically you decide when you are consuming the resource query whether you are going to consume them or not. So it's the difference between you can write for each or you can write a wait for each, and both work.
So your your entity types basically implement both enumerable and iasync.
Our query types. So it's
What do you do with cancellation?
the same dirty way everybody
You do the
with cancellation.
yeah, okay. Forgot recently we had this conversation. Stephen, I think, suggested change somewhere. I think it was one of the collection types where we basically said, well, instead of making the collection type implement iasync enumerable, we decided to give you a method. And I think that was because that would have implications on the immutability of the result.
Do you remember any case?
Stephen, do you remember that?
The one we were just discussing was channels.
The channel type, yes. That's
Yeah, and the discussion was around, do you expect an enumerable to mutate the source? You know, like with a sequential enumerator, you sort of like if you enumerate over a queue, you don't expect it to drain the queue.
right.
And if you're enumerating over a channel, it's draining it as you're enumerating. So the question was around, do we, do we just allow you to say await for each or async for each, or do we force you to call a method to say like read all or something? And we ended up on the latter. Interestingly, after the fact, someone commented on the original issue highlighting an existing enumerator in ADO.NET that actually mutates.
Which one was that? Do you remember?
I don't.
So in data reader, there is a way to get an enumerator. What is it implements
DbDataReader implements it, but it's a crappy old.
So it's not even enumerable of T, right?
No, it's a non-generic. It's really bad.
Yeah. And
What do you return? An object array or?
Yeah, it's objects. No, it returns a record.
DbData record. So it's an enumerable of DbData record.
It's awful. Not worth discussing. But in theory, if we really want to, we could do something in ADO.NET with iasync enumerable that would make sense. But that's a discussion.
Yeah. So I have two different explanations for why DbDataReader doesn't implement iasync enumerable. Sorry, IEnumerable, and now why it shouldn't implement iasync enumerable. And one is, well, it was possibly invented before IEnumerable. But the other one is basically the same reason the ML.NET guys don't want to implement IEnumerable, which is I don't want to allocate the .current every time. And that is actually the case with DbDataReader right now. It's like it doesn't allocate necessarily for each row. It's just a sliding window over some data in the buffer.
Yeah, the reader is effectively the enumerator, right?
Yeah.
And enumerable combined in one thing, right? But which is actually a fairly efficient way to do most of the stuff. It's just, I mean, the question also is for ADO.NET, if you think about it, right? Like I don't know, for eaching doesn't buy you that much because you only, the bulk of your code is not the move next. The bulk of your code is getting the radius out of the thing, because the thing you're getting is not the thing you want, right? The thing you want is a person or something else. So you still have to access individual fields and get the data out, right? In which case, I think in ADO, sorry, in EF, it makes a lot more sense because you already get the object out, so you might as well just collapse that into...
Or on Dapper or whatever you're
Yeah.
using. Yeah, so I tend to think about ADO.NET as a lower level building block that doesn't need to do this, but we're having a struggle with that.
I think it's worth, for example, we could imagine some sort of API in ADO.NET that materializes value tuples, and then it makes a lot of sense for them to be enumerable. And then it could be a very nice way.
Favorite API.
Lowercase, or in camel case, or Pascal?
Yeah, like tuples are great. It's just casing we can't agree on what the case is. No, I mean, like tuples have other problems. It's like the biggest problem with tuples is you have to decide how many fields you have, and you better never change your mind on that. The one thing we said in the BCL, what we probably will do moving forward is give you more deconstruct methods, where it's easier to just take the result and like assign it to the locals, because you can overload those guys by arity. So you could say, yep, in V1 we only had 2 fields, and then in V1 we had 3, but because the way you write the deconstruct syntax in C#, the compiler knows which one to pick up. So we can always add to that, and that seems generally fine. But with tuples, you really have to be sure that you never need more than whatever you decided on. And you better never need any other members, like a method or something else. I mean, you could, in principle, do an extension method over a tuple, but then how specific are your types?
And it works over all of the files.
Yeah, which is, tuples are really great for privates, right? If you just have worker methods, you don't feel like generating types for them. But for public APIs, you're probably better off defining them.
I have been thinking also like something, I mean, it's super ambiguous and it's like just a dream that I have about the language feature that could apply to tuples, to value tuples, or it could apply to the work that the NF.NET guys have been doing. That in many cases you need a T that is like this other previous T, but it adds this property. And I wish there was like a way to express a generic constraint that says this T based on this other T, but it adds these properties so that in the rest of your code you can refer to that property. Do you know what I mean?
Not really. It sounds like a little bit you want extension everything a little bit, but
no. I mean, it's super common that you are composing over some model, and you have like something like a link operator that is going to take the source T, and is going to add a property to it that contains some data that you massage, like calculated property over something that was already there. And from now on, the rest of your code is going to be based on this other T2 that is like T1, but with additional properties.
Without containing a T1.
So how do you build a strongly typed API for something like ML.NET? It's almost impossible, like, because you don't have that.
You basically want to be added. You basically want to have a type representation of kind of like a fake derived type, right? Where you basically have a T2 that is effectively extending T1, but with one more property or something. Right?
Is that shapes? Is that like the shapes proposal?
It sounds a little bit like it, although I'm not entirely sure what the mechanics of the shapes one was. I think the shapes one was a bit more generic, no pun intended. But I think it was a bit more. I think you could define more complicated operations on that.
I read initially a long time ago the shapes proposal, but I don't remember about it.
Yeah, because it probably talked about higher order functors and combinators that usually don't last very long in my brain. All right, it seems like
I read that. I need that for to get to sleep tonight. Send me a pointer.
All right, so it seems like we have exhausted our questions. You guys got everything out of it that you wanted, right?
Yeah, thank you.
And you're only in this week? You're going back next week?
Going back to Berlin
next week?
This Saturday, yes.
We should talk about beers this week
I would love
before
that.
you leave.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, let me first finish the online streaming if I find the button again. All right, bye-bye, guys.